Do you have a notification that says I'm recording?
Yes, it says.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And this is our all things Eastern Europe episode. And who better to have on than our returning champion, the very underrated but the brilliant Małgorzata Kulbaczewska-Figat, who is a contributor to the Barricade, which is a pan-Eastern European news outlet, which also covers international affairs and always from a critical left perspective. And she's a contributor and editor to Transform Europe or Transform Network, and is the host of Crossborder Talks. So Małgorzata, first of all, thanks so much for coming back on the program.
Youri, thanks a lot for having me, and yet in this special end of the year episode. It's really a pleasure.
Yes, it is our end of the year episode. I am going to be, starting tomorrow, I'm going to be on a Christmas, New Year's hiatus. So who better than to end and of course, who better than to end the episode than our wonderful returning champion Małgorzata. and it's an honor to have you back on the program. So Małgorzata, let's get underway. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you about, and you were talking to me about this off the air, you said that there are some strikes going on in Poland and Lithuania. And if memory serves me well, I think the last time I had you on the program, there were some public transportation strikes that actually was happening in Poland. So yes, do talk to us about that.
Okay, so I think that there are two events worth mention in the labor world of Central Eastern Europe. One of them is the big transportation strike in Vilnius, Lithuania, which is now entering into its third week because the guys started their protest action on 5th December. And the second event is the fact that food delivery workers, also the platform workers, have set up their first trade union in Poland. And if I am not mistaken, it is also one of the first organizations of this kind in Central Eastern Europe. So we see two milestone events in the newest history of labor movement in our part of Europe. A very militant action in a city or in a country which is not associated with trade union movements, and also a successful action to unionize platform workers. So, and to get things even more exciting, these platform workers whose trade union was registered like a couple of weeks ago are having their first collective strike actions just now. It is an unofficial protest action, but this week the many food delivery workers working for the biggest platform in Poland, the Takeaway.com, which exists in many countries under different names, they have decided not to sign up ready for work this week. And so as you can see, even in places where we thought that labor movement has been buried forever, it is now standing up from the grave. And I had the pleasure to talk to one of the organizers of the food delivery workers, who told me that when they started looking for people ready to join the trade union, they even didn't expect that there would be volunteers. They were rather ready to rebuke stereotypes, to explain why it is good to be in a trade union, or to tell people that trade unions are not, some kind of bureaucratic structures with old people sitting in their office and producing same speeches every year for the 1st May. Instead, what they saw was enthusiasm among young people, among young delivery workers, both Poles and ethnic Ukrainians and Belarusians, so the migrant component is also there. And they have collected the necessary number of the members. And the further course of events was even surprising for them, because first the delivery workers asked to fight for higher wages. But then when they found out that in some cities in Poland, the workers are getting extra money for working in winter, and in some other there is no bonus like this, they decided to stage this spontaneous protest to get equal conditions for everybody. So as you can see, this is what I might have said in one of your programs earlier.
Yeah.
The young generation who was born under capitalism in Poland, or who was born in this period where everybody was praising the market economy, is now getting the experience how the market economy is really like. And these people are not their parents, for instance, who might have held some negative stereotypes about socialism that they remember from their youth, the empty shops and so on.
Yeah.
And these people are coming to labor market with their unique experience, and their head is fresh. They haven't heard most of the stereotypes that their parents heard, and they are now seeing how their experience is confronted with what they were taught about capitalism. For you might have also said it, but I think it is worth reminding. In Polish schools, and I think in many other Central European countries as well, we have even a special course which is called the basis of entrepreneurship. So
basis of entrepreneurship.
Yes, so every teenager in Poland is taught that he or she would have a company one day. We would be all business owners. And
wow, everyone's going to
yes,
the lottery then.
And you know what? I remember although I have finished my high school quite some time ago, but I still remember how we had to invent an idea for our own company. We had to create a kind of business plan, and we were all left with an impression that whatever we do, it will be a great success, and we just need to do some market research and come up with funny idea, and the world is ours.
Wow. The color revolution, they really worked revenue, guys. Left.
And you know what? On the other hand, we were never said what could happen if we actually don't own a business. There was no mention of labor law, no mention of how we could secure our interest if we happen to be, employees, not employers. And the result is that people in Poland for many years, young people born in 1990 like me, or a little bit earlier or further, everybody was entering the free market with the head full of ideas that you have to run a business. Otherwise, you are nobody. You are stupid. You are apparently not as smart as those who do have companies of their own. So people were realizing that it is impossible. And instead, what the market offers them is low-paid jobs, unstable contracts, really psychotic employers, because a lot of employers in Poland should not really own anything.
Running a business.
They should not work with other people. So now these people, and in addition, you add to this all other questions like the lack of affordable housing, like low wages, like the fact that you are 30 and you still will live with your parents. I am lucky not to live with my parents anymore, but I know that there now about 1/5 of people my age still faces this problem, that you either
in Poland alone or in various countries.
In Poland, I mean. But okay. There are countries in the region where the percentage is even higher. And people in Poland are now facing a dilemma. Like people in my age who want to have their own families, many of them want to have children. It is natural. And what dilemma they face? Either you stay with your parents in their flat, which is also not as big to house two families, or you look for other people, strangers to you, and you rent a flat together. So
yeah,
this is basically what the capitalist market in Poland offers to you. And people entering the labor market are now seeing how it is, or people who are on the labor market for a couple of years now see that this really doesn't work. And that is why these all young labor initiatives are really appearing here and there. And I am really happy to see more and more of them appearing. And And
the unions that are taking actions, are these newly formed unions, or are these or are these decades institutional, or are they institutions that have already existed before, which have decided to take militant actions?
I think it is somehow halfway, because, for instance, I will again refer to the example of the delivery workers. Their structure is embedded in Konfederacja Pracy, or the Workers' Confederation, which is in turn a part of the All Poland Trade Union Confederation. So the biggest trade union association in Poland, which is also which has a reputation of being a bureaucratic and not really efficient structure. However, within this structure, you find such militant groups as this Workers' Confederation, who also has a YAF section, which is extremely active and extremely creative in reaching out to new trade unionists. So as you can see, there are people inside these old structures who are creatively thinking of how to revive them, how to adapt to new conditions. And this is truly, truly inspiring.
Fantastic. And quick follow-up then, where's solidarity in all of this?
Oh, solidarity. Yeah, Solidarity wanted to protest in the middle of December against inflation, against low wages, all these crisis pact that the workers feel on their skin, but they actually recalled the demonstration at the very last moment. And it was never said officially, but everybody who knows the realities in Poland can guess that just somebody from the government called them and said, oh, guys, you get this and that, and perhaps some concessions to your workers, but please don't manifest in Warsaw. Don't do that. And so, yes, they agreed.
Unbelievable.
This is not the first time when they do something like that. This is, I remember, for example, 2019 or 18, anyway, before the pandemic, the huge teachers' strike in Poland, where also it was led together by the Solidarity and by the Teachers' Union, which is a part of the All Poland Trade Unions Confederation. And, instead of keeping this solidarity alive, the Solidarity as Trade Unions Confederation gave hints to the government that they could actually step out if some concessions are given. The result is that the strike did not succeed. This was one of the reasons for which, and teachers are actually got nothing after this huge mobilization. So Solidarity is still keeping this unholy alliance with the government, to the detriment of the workers.
Unbelievable. But we're going to be following this, and we're definitely going to have to do another program where hopefully there's some big updates going, where hopefully you can give us some more updates on this. And yes, all power to the workers. I hope that they succeed in their actions. And then I have to ask, actually, and was there something going on in Lithuania that you feel needs attention? Talk to us about that.
Yes. So on the 5th December, one of the trade union which unites the bus drivers, the public transport bus drivers, proclaimed that the strike was starting, and from that moment on, there is only only half of public transportation in Vilnius is working properly. The other drivers are not driving. The other connections are non-functional. And so that you understand how important are buses in Vilnius, I just tell you that they are the most absolutely the key to public transport in Vilnius. For there is no metropolitan trains, there is no tramways. Basically, buses and trolley buses are the key to moving around the city, which is not very populous, but is spread over quite an area. And what is happening around the strike is that the buses are not driving like they should. The workers are demanding a pay rise, and they also want to sign a collective bargain. They want to sign a collective bargain that would last for longer, because they feel that the public transport company, the municipal company, would try to cheat on them some later on, like to cut off again some of the pay, and so they want just to keep this declaration, get this declaration that the pay rise will not be temporary or whatever. And what is happening is that the city's leadership, so Remigijus Šimašius, the liberal mayor of Vilnius, has been attacking the workers from the very first day. On the first day, he basically gave a public statement that he is very thankful to the bus drivers who do not participate in protest action, and that he came to work by bike. So it is possible to live even when the strike is going on. And
Jesus Christ.
Later on, he also said that in his opinion, the workers are mobbing the the leader of the public city transport company. He used the word mobbing, which is basically for something else. You can't mob your employer, you get it. And
yeah.
Yes, and also his comments during the whole action are really, really bad. But I think that the Social Democratic Party of Lithuania gave a good rebuke of what he's saying. They said, I will be quoting from my memory, so this might not be the exact word, but the meaning remains. So they said that Šimašius likes claiming that Vilnius is such a European modern metropolis with 21st century standard, but when it comes to workers and the working conditions, it is 19th century standard, what he tries to impose. So, yes.
Unbelievable. Continue.
Yes, and to give you even more details about how difficult it was to set this protest, I have to tell you that the dispute on pay rises and working conditions was going on in Vilnius for more than 2 years. And in fact, the public transport company, a municipal company, I remind, actually brought the case to court because they wanted the court to proclaim that those are essential workers, those are like public functionaries, and they should not strike. They should not have their constitutional right to stop working. What the court said was that the bus drivers actually do have the right to strike. Just what they have to do is to secure 50% of bus connections, because this is really like an essential service to everybody, and stopping all buses in Vilnius would just, destroy the city and normal life there. So,
unbelievable.
Yes, so as you can see, this transportation company, the VVT, or the Vilnius Regional Transport, they did everything not to allow this strike. And also now there is still an ongoing debate between the trade union and the leadership of the company, with both sides claiming that it is the other side that does not allow the negotiations to go forward. But what is the most impressive is the mobilization of the drivers, who decide that this Monday that the strike is going on, that if their demands are not met, they will keep striking also during the Christmas period, which will be painful, as Lithuania is a Catholic country, perhaps even to a greater degree than Poland. So yes, as you can see, the workers are really, really, really militant. They are really highly mobilized, and I would like to stress one more aspect. Mm-hmm. If the strike in Poland that we were discussing during our previous meeting together was also concerning the transportation workers. It was a victorious strike, by the way. And as you can see, there are also protests in the UK. Concerning transport, there were also protests in Serbia with the same branch of the workers protesting, and there were protests in France a couple of times over the last few years. So what we can see is a tendency that public transport was neglected for decades. It was considered a cheap transportations for those unsmart people who don't own companies and don't have cars. So the both local and central governments weren't really caring about this thing. And we came to a moment when the bus drivers are actually so desperate that they either leave this job and look for some other employment opportunities, or just go on stage these protests, which could have been unthinkable already a few years ago. And as you can see, we came to a moment when the free market or austerity approach to public services has really put us in a situation when we face the alternative that ordinary people will just be deprived of basic services. For transportation is a basic service. It is not profitable, but it is something that a healthy state should ensure to the citizens. A healthy state or healthy local government. It is whatever. Yeah. So
that's incredible. And before I change topic and we talk about imperialism and how the peace movement is doing, I have to ask this question, which is, why is there so little attention being given to these historic strikes, these big strikes that's going on in Poland, Lithuania, and elsewhere in Eastern Europe? Why so little attention why so little attention is being given to them in European news outlets, but even left-leaning outlets and indie left news outlets?
Okay, so I have two theories on that. And first, I just could make a little advertisement at this point as the Crossborder Talks host and also the co-manager of the Crossborder Talks site. I can give a New Year's pledge at this point to try to publish more on such events. By the way, we will be publishing an interview with the delivery workers leader and possibly a text on Lithuania as well soon. So I could, at this point, I could invite everybody to follow Crossborder Talks. You will find out more about such events as this that we are discussing today.
And if they can, donate generously.
Yes. And now, why the other media are apparently not so interested? So there are two reasons. One of them is very simple, and second is more geopolitical. So I could start from the geopolitical one. So as you know, generally speaking, in the West, the Central Eastern Europe is considered a success story of capitalist restoration, of a success story of how our societies stood up against socialism, and we, by our own will, installed capitalism, and we got the patterns of this capitalism from the very center of the West or from the United States. We went on with the most neoliberal, most aggressive capitalism. We even didn't look to some welfare states models that worked in France, in Scandinavia, whatever. We simply took the neoliberalism pure et simple to our states. So the ending of this story is that we are now living happily. Yeah. So if the events are not confirming the thesis, then why the hell inform the public about these events? Perhaps people will start asking questions. So, they wanted capitalism so much, they struggled to get it, and now they are seeing that something is wrong. So there must be really something wrong. For us, in one fantastic text we published on Crossborder Talks, a Romanian writer there is explaining that we in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, where we in Eastern Europe, we were installing capitalism in our countries, we were more Western and more capitalist than the West and capitalism itself. And now we are realizing that we perhaps made a wrong step, that we could have repaired socialist system, we could have invented something else, but no, instead we changed our region into a capitalist periphery. By the way, it is also for the Western countries like Germany, my Polish homeland, but also Czechia, but also Hungary, to some degree even the Baltic states and Lithuania in particular, with the reindustrialization going in, with the relocation of the Western companies. We are all a reservoir of cheap labor, and we are the areas where you can have a more relaxed attitude to labor rights. Of course, relaxed from the point of view of the business. So it would be really, really bad news for this Western capital if actually we started started resisting. If we started resisting to this, and if we started defending our rights, if we wanted to have the same rights as the Western workers, for instance. And that is why it is really not very welcome to write about these events in mainstream Western media. That is my theory. And as far as the left-wing media or more left media are concerned, well, the reason is very sad. The left-wing media are usually very poor, and they just can't afford having correspondence or whatever on contacts in Eastern Europe. Also, if you want to report on Eastern Europe, it is welcome to know at least some of our Eastern European languages, and they are not that simple for Westerners. I still admire you as you pronounce my name. You are one of the very rare people based outside of Eastern Europe who are able to do so. So really,
well, I butchered my last guest, Pizza S's last name, who did a great documentary series on Canada. So I am a product of of Yankeeism, in which we have a tendency of butchering people's names, unfortunately.
Yeah. So you can imagine if even pronouncing the basic words can be difficult for Westerners, then how about learning Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, Lithuanian, Bulgarian, whatever. Oh, Romanian could be Romanian can be an option. This is a Latin language after all, but okay. In any case, as you see, we, the left-wing media in Eastern Europe, we need resources. We need a lot of work ourselves. We need better contacts with the West, and there must be also more interest for us in the West. And I hope I am contributing to waking up this interest in my Transform Europe comrades, in the listeners of your talks. I hope so.
One can only hope, and yes, and that's why I encourage everybody to check out the fantastic work that you do at Transform Network, at Crossborder Talks, as well as the Barricade, and then that's a perfect segue to this question, which is I wanted to ask. How is the peace movement doing in your country of Poland and in the region of Eastern Europe with this terrible ongoing war between Russia, Ukraine, and de facto NATO as well? How is the peace movement getting any stronger, or is it still or is it still sort of stale, so to speak?
Okay. So here at this moment, I should perhaps mention the feminist peace movement that are growing in Russia itself, because if this war,
yes,
if this war is to stop, then it must be stopped by peace movements within Russia. This is my opinion, and I think that whatever we do in the West, whatever statements we do, then anyway, to stop this war that was in this phase was started by Russia, there must be a peace movement inside Russia. So the fantastic job that is done by the feminist, the feminist resistance is taking like the first, the primary role in the resistance against mobilization, but also against this awful form of Russian capitalism that was born in the 90s. It is as you perhaps know, it is virtually impossible in Russia now to stage street protests. A couple of weeks ago, the new regulations were signed by Putin that forbid protesting in the church area, next to schools, next to universities, or next to any kind of public local government buildings, plus also airports. So basically, as when I read this regulation, my first thought was, so the only place you can now safely protest is the huge Russian steppe somewhere in Krasnodar Krai or whatever. Yeah, the areas when there are not many populated points. Yeah, you can stay there and shout your slogans to the emptiness. But yeah, it is. So as you also might have seen, the anti-war protests that happened in Russia in February and in March were also suppressed, and people are now are getting into trouble in Russia for suggesting in the social media that they do not support the so-called special military operation, or that they are not really happy with what Russian army is doing. There is now the special law saying that defamating the Russian armed forces is punishable by prison. So what the Russian feminist resistance is doing is to keep being active on Telegram, is to print their own semi-underground leaflets and newspapers where they explain from a feminist perspective why women do not want war, why women do not want to send their sons, their fathers, husbands, whoever, to the slaughterhouse, basically. And they also connect the issue of the war with the question of equality, women's rights, and building a more egalitarian society. So they are facing patriarchy at the same time, and the issue of war. And the other group that is slowly starting to resist to war inside Russia are the native peoples. I mean here the Buryats, of whom you all might have heard, the Buryats in the far Siberia, but also other nations, the Yakuts, also a far Siberian ethnic group.
Wow.
And
okay, interesting.
Yes, and but also some of the nations in the Caucasus. Why it is so important for Yakuts and Buryats, for instance, to resist to the war? In fact, during the Russian mobilization, they were the group that was particularly affected. The mobilization that Putin organized last time was not equally organized in the whole country. Basically, the state tried to conscript as many people from the far Siberia, from the smaller towns as possible, and people from St. Petersburg or Moscow were not really the first aim, So the most educated, so the ethnically Russian people were left in peace this time, while the army was filled with the nations of Siberia, the poor nations, the people who are not stereotypically white Russian, white not in historical sense, but and so. Also, many of them were very desperate and actually in economic sense, because as the regions of Yakutia and Buryatia are not very rich, and a lot of people are really living there beyond the social minimum. So they were actually eager to join the army, as it was just perceived as an economic opportunity. And but now these nations are realizing that what has happened, they are sent to the front, thousands of them are dead already. And also sometimes the soldiers were appalled at the conditions in which the preliminary training took place. They realized that there was no winter clothing from them, and it was only being searched at the last moment, such basic stuff that really can make you doubt whether this country really cares about your life and everything. So now these groups are starting to organize. They are starting to think about they are starting to think about some kind of resistance, some autonomy demands, and all of this is still in the very starting phase, I must say. So as I said, these groups are these activists are active on the internet. They are looking for direct contact by producing leaflets, by producing this paper that the feminists are now publishing. But as you have to know one thing to understand why this all is developing so slowly. Russian society has been depoliticized deliberately over last years. as you can say, as you know, historically the authoritarian regimes demanded from citizens some part of active participation in public life. And by active participation, they understood an active support endorsement for the government. In Russia, the situation was pretty opposite, as actually the only public event that the authorities actually wanted people to participate in was the 9th May or the Victory Day celebrations. And for the rest of the year, Russians were actually discouraged from any political participations. They were to be happy with the government. They were to be happy that the government secured them some better living standards than in the 90s. And they were not really to take part in any political public life. They were to trust the authorities and just do nothing. So, as you can imagine, now the Russians, even those who would like to get involved in some movements, they have to remind the strategies. They have to relearn the strategies of the protest movements, and they realize that how limited are the possibilities. You don't go to the streets to protest. You can't set up a protest organization or a critical organization more or less in the light side, because you will be immediately accused of getting money from the West. And as you can guess, a lot of Russians are still distrustful of the West. And they have the reasons to be distrustful from the West. So it is even difficult for people and it is even for people who don't want the war. Many of them are then asking a question. So, well, we don't want this war, but perhaps we were forced to join this war by the West, and then their answers are really different. Also, don't forget that the media sphere in Russia is also very limited. We may complain about the media in the West. We may complain a lot about the media in the West, but what you get in Russia is not really advantageous to that. You basically hear the government's position under different forms. You basically get the message of the Russian authorities, of the propaganda message, which is sometimes really very, very on poor level. And
just very little pushback.
Yes, and I can just give you an example on that. When the Russian media cover the events in Poland, which they actually do quite often, because Poland is like an arch enemy figure, has become recently. Poland is like, the forepost of the West, so we are getting under fire regularly in Russian media. Okay. So as I realized, the favorite strategy of big and respectable Russian media is to find some incident in Poland, like a Ukrainian getting beaten up in the street in Poland. Well, this is very sad, but this happens he even might have been beaten up not for being a Ukrainian. And you know what? And they can build a story on that, saying that Poles want Ukrainians out of Poland.
Okay, interesting.
Or they find some really, really small right-wing media outlet claiming that Poland and Russia should be friends and Poland should get out of the NATO immediately, and and the Tsarist times were so fantastic. Yes, those are people like this, and they say, for example, like a Polish expert want Warsaw back to be in one country with Russia. Yeah.
Well, nice to know that there are some right-wingers that want peace with Russia. I'll put aside some of the other grotesque views of theirs, but
yeah, there's all kinds of that. So as you can see, it is really fantastic to see that some resistance movements, there are people wanting peace in Russia too, but there is a very long way before they achieve something.
But what about Ukraine now? Because an organization I'm often in touch with. I've done 2 online events with World Beyond War. They're in touch mostly with the anti-war movement within Ukraine. And one of their members, Youri, I'm going to butcher his last name, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, but his name is also Youri, and he's part of the Ukrainian pacifist movement. They're very and quite left leaning. And I'm wondering, are you into? Do you know anything about the peace movement in Ukraine and their efforts in trying to stop this war, or?
Well, I'm
or
not
in
really.
Poland, or any other part of the region of Eastern Europe.
Okay, so I'm not really familiar with the peace movements in Ukraine. The trade unions in Ukraine I do talk with, or I did write about, are pro-defense. They are all supporting the defense effort of the country, including the demand for the weapons from the West. But for me, this is absolutely understandable. These guys are defending their land, their families. They are asking for these resources that there are like reachable for them. So the trade unions in Ukraine are, by the way, the trade unions in Ukraine are now doing a job that they are now very important spots of self-organizations of the people. They are organizing a lot of stuff. They are helping to, whenever the civilian infrastructure is destroyed, then the workers step in to repair it. So, and the trade unions are organizing humanitarian aid. They are organizing support for people who are not in the army, who are now trying to survive in these war conditions. So this is, by the way, a very interesting how the situation will be developing well after the war, because I'm sure that the war will end one day when people involved in trade union movement now got empowered by this experience, and the state at the same time was not really welcoming that they are doing this. As you may know, as the Ukrainian state has actually limited workers' rights in the conditions of war.
I was just thinking that I was also going to mention, and I was also going to mention that Zelensky. I recently saw Max Blumenthal of the Gray Zone. He was on Minpress News' YouTube show, and Manar Adley, who's been a guest on this program, was interviewing about how Zelensky is pursuing a very harsh, extreme privatization regime, and of course he's also outlawed any political opposition, whether it's from the left or the right, the center, the far right, the far left, and any other fringe group.
Well, so what you say about neoliberalization is perfectly true, and basically what is now the Zelensky and his co-workers are pushing for is the same catastrophic scenario that we had in the 90s in Eastern Europe, and when I happen to read the statements or manifestos of some of Ministry of Economy of Ukraine, I am really, really sad, because I see that the workers of Ukraine are now making a really huge effort to defend their country. They consider their duty to join the defense effort. And what do they get in reward are the promises of more privatization after the war, about selling out basically everything that is still in the hand of the Ukrainian state. And also some of the statements of the Ukrainian economy ministry just make me wonder who taught them economy or where they were looking when Poland and Lithuania and everybody had their shock therapy. They can claim, for example, that it is better for the economy to be based on small and middle enterprises, because in case of war, they are not easily destroyed like the big factories. They refer to the case of Mariupol, when the industrial giants went into ruins because they were destroyed by the invading army. And they say that this is the proof that we don't need big companies because they can be destroyed in the war. It is so.
What?
Yes, they argue. I'm really sad that I'm sorry that I forgot the name of the woman who wrote actually this column piece. He is a vice minister of economy of Ukraine. You can find it for sure. She basically stated that the future Ukrainian economy must be based on small and medium enterprises because they are flexible. They adapt to conditions. And when you have a huge industrial factory and a war starts, then the factory is destroyed, the business is over, and So that's why we can't have huge companies.
Someone should tell her that even the best private-sized companies will be destroyed in the war.
But actually, what was destroyed in Mariupol was private, because these factories were sold to oligarchs in the 90s. So yes, Azovstal was a private thing, if you refer to the most famous case. And the same with, for example, the Kryvyi Rih, the huge industrial city 50 kilometers from the front. It is famous for the copper mining. It is private. It was sold to ArcelorMittal or to oligarchs. From Ukraine. So yes, and another statement she made in that article. I'm really sorry, I forgot her name, but you can Google it. So she said that her vision for post-war Ukraine is a free step, as you know, the space with no forests and so on. As this is a historical actually myth, because Ukraine actually do have this kind of floral formation, and in the past this was the area where the peasants from escaping from Poland to have some free life in the free Cossack communities, where the serf peasants tried to start a new life there. And now she is using this historical comparison to say that Ukraine will be the free zone for the entrepreneurship, that the state will not interfere whatever they do. The state welcomes them to set business, to employ people, fire people, whatever. Yes, she says this is the recipe for economic success, and I must say that this is basically the recipe for a huge failure for a state like Ukraine, because whatever will be the outcome of the war, we may be sure of one thing: this country is ruined. This country has cities lying in rubble. These are the result of the Russian intervention, that the whole cities were destroyed. You need money to raise it up. You need money to accommodate people who are now in the West, if they ever decide to go back to Ukraine. And honestly, I doubt so. I think that some of them...
If they hire the same goons that they hired in Afghanistan, Iraq, to be...
So you can see
of endless tragedy in Ukraine.
The Ukrainian state will be left without resources, and if everything gets privatized, it will just function as some empty structure which offers nothing to the citizens. And while of course this is the Russian invasion that is the primary reason of the whatever happens to Ukrainians now, it is, I must say it clear, the government is not helping. The government, it is also a historical experience that under war conditions, the government strengthened the state intervention in economy, because in such conditions there must be some center that takes care of the citizens. There must be somebody who plans what will be going on. You never sell out your last assets if you are in such a desperate condition. And unfortunately, this is suggested to Ukraine also by some Western advisors.
How's the peace movement, though, in your country of Poland doing?
Country?
How's the peace movement in Poland doing?
Okay, so well, unfortunately, we didn't have a real peace movement even before this war. It is not that we wanted to take part in a war. For most of my compatriots don't want to go to war. It was, by the way, it was seen very clearly a few weeks ago when the Ministry of Defense in Poland declared that we are in a difficult international condition, and some part of men who were examined and who were considered able to serve in the army, but were not conscripted because we don't have a mandatory conscription anymore, might be now called to have some basic military training. A very basic military training, like 2 weeks or so, or 2 months. But anyway, it's just a momentous experience to get some basic qualifications. The answer,
okay.
The answer to this was absolute outrage. And a lot of people who are very brave on the internet saying how we need to bomb Moscow or something like this were now saying that, well, I am a pacifist, I am sick, I have a family, I am sick and I have a family, and I am against military conscription, all kind of excuses started to circulate in the air.
Yeah, it's a NIMBY, so, not in my backyard.
Yes, so as you can see, Polish government might be very vocal in the support of Ukraine, and the general emotion of the society is that we need to support Ukraine and Ukrainians, but the average Polishman doesn't want to go to war. And why this does not translate into a vocal peace movement? I think there are like two reasons for that. The first reason is that the invasion of Ukraine really scared the Polish society as a whole.
Yes.
It is not it is not really understandable. Well, I have to refer to history as well.
Well, basically,
yes, theoretically, we are in a different situation than Ukraine. We are in the NATO, and we are hosting the NATO troops on our soil and so on. But for Poles, we have also the experience of the Second World War, when at the beginning we also had an alliance with France and Great Britain, which were supposed to come in our defense if Hitler does something. What they did, you can Google how bravely they marched 7 kilometers into German territory. So I am talking now of the French army in the West. So I think it is like natural for Poles to be distrustful and to really feel insecure if a war breaks out in our neighborhood, and especially if this is Russia, which is involved, as we were told for 30 years that Russia is our enemy, and over the last couple of years, Russia really did very few to change this reputation. As I told you, Poland was repeatedly attacked in Russian media for doing this and that. So people had the reasons to be afraid, and so this would be really. If some peace movement now in Poland tried to say that we need negotiations in Ukraine, or that we need to seek for a peaceful solution which would be acceptable for Russia as well, he would be labeled a traitor immediately, because we are afraid. Like we want guarantees, we want to be secure, and this negotiations when the West talks to Russia over our heads, this is something that really, really sounds bad to Polish public opinion. And the second reason why we have no peace movement is that there is, even before this Russian invasion, there was really no serious debate on our foreign policy in the public sphere. It was obvious to everybody that our ally is the United States, and that we are doing things for the United States here and there. Nobody from the Polish leadership really apologized ever from our participation in Iraq war, for example. Nobody ever said that it was a bad idea to go there. I don't expect even some bigger apology. Nobody even bothered to say that it was not a good idea. And
didn't Poland also have troops in Afghanistan? That NATO war.
Oh yes, we had troops in Afghanistan, and we also never said there was anything wrong about that. Yeah. Yes, so as you can even in the Western media, there were some debates on what role did, for example, the British really play in Afghanistan or so. Afghanistan or Iraq. In Poland, it never happened. When it was, the only thing that the Polish elites are perhaps regretful of is that the Americans promised us some profits from the Iraqi invasion, and we actually did not get it.
Wow.
So yes.
That's a pretty sad state of affairs then
As you can imagine, if we had no proper debate about foreign policy, if we even didn't consider some other options, if we always mocked the idea of neutrality because it was always rebuked with saying, oh, we are in the center of Europe, how can be neutral, case closed. Now it is even a worse moment to discuss anything like this. You know, Russia is now openly saying that Poland is an enemy state. Russia is invading Ukraine and destroying civilian infrastructure. The Polish society is a threat. And here in this context, this is so unfavorable for the peace movement that, frankly, I could not have found a worse moment for coming up with some ideas of a peace solution. And especially that, as I said, it is really it is a fear that the Poles and Ukrainians actually do share, that the Western powers might talk to Russia over our heads, and Eastern Europe will be again divided according to someone's wishes and not according to what we might like to say.
That's a perfect segue to the last thing I want to talk to you about. Because we were talking about about the peace movement. How ironic that in Russia there's a stronger peace movement than in Poland, but because now Germany has a coalition government. It's the SPD and the Greens, and they're very gung ho about NATO and endless wars and so forth. And I think the joke is, I was saying to my colleagues at Orinoco Tribune off the air that when they were asking how's the winter crisis, the energy crisis going on in Belgium, and I was saying it's terrible. I mean every house you go to practically is cold and so forth because everybody is afraid, of their energy bills. And I was saying that our leaders, they would rather that we eat grass, that they'd rather we eat poison Monsanto grass than actually just make peace with Russia and have Russian gas that to heat us all up and so forth like that. And the German foreign minister, who I think is a member of the Green Party, said that even if her own constituents demanded we want peace with Russia and this war in Ukraine, she said that no, we're going to continue on with this war. So I have to ask you, since you do follow all of Europe, how is the peace movement in Germany, Norway, and Denmark? Because if memory serves me well, didn't the much of the left, those that support the traditional social democratic center-left parties, but even ones that support alternative left parties like their Greens or their other parties that call themselves the left and so forth like that, aren't they all in support of NATO and stuff like that, and continuing on with war against Russia in Ukraine?
Okay, before I come to this question, I think it is worthy to mention that the German government is going against the wishes of its voters, not only in this case, or even worse, there are other problems than this. Because as far the German public opinion still stands for supporting Ukraine, even though they are much more moderate than the public opinion in Eastern Europe. But there are other issues. For example, there is an issue of energy politics in Germany. As you know, Germany was following this politics of basic itself on renewable sources, the wind, solar energy plus natural gas. And even having a more functional atomic, the nuclear power plants. Yes, they were closed down one after another, even though the public opinion actually stood for keeping them active. So only now the German government declared that some of them, the three of them, actually could stay functional until the April of 2024 as a kind of reserve source. So it is also something that happens against the public opinion, because the public opinion wants stable energy sources and wants these atomic power plants to stay in place. But the German government is continuing the previous line. And also, by the way, the Germans, I am very skeptical of the foreign policy of this German government in general, because my impression is that they want to stay the part of the West, and the Western military effort, but they want to limit their participation because they hope for a peace deal with Russia that would just take them back to the time of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 and the cheap gas, which was a huge asset from their economy. And when these peace negotiations finally start, they want to be first to say to Russians, oh, guys, we didn't hurt you that much as the Americans. So please consider this and let's just forget the whole thing.
Sneaky bastards.
So,
okay.
So as you can see, it is now the public opinion in Germany that is sometimes demanding a more generous action in support of Ukraine than the German government is actually willing to deliver. And this is a paradox again. And as far as the peace movements in other countries, like you mentioned,
like Norway,
yes, yeah, Norway, Denmark, to Sweden to some extent. There we had parliamentary elections in Sweden also this year, and one of the party of the left party, or the more radical left party than the Social Democrats, was clearly against joining NATO. They said it straight, and they were also saying it during the campaign. So the situation is a little bit, the situation is difficult for the peace movements because people in Europe really do worry. Of course, it is not true to say that this is the first war taking place in Europe since 1945, because we had Yugoslavia, for instance, in the meantime, and everybody now seems to forget it. But it is the first war since 1945 that everybody in Europe is like following live everywhere on the media. We get a lot of disturbing pictures. We hear stories from Ukrainian refugees because, it is also the first case when the temporary protection directive was introduced in Europe. So we open the doors widely for Ukrainians, and we are really very much informed on what is going on. We hear this, we get the pictures, we hear the stories, and so the people are afraid. It is very easy to say to people, well, the war will not come to your territory because you are a part of some alliance or so. But if you get these disturbing pictures from everywhere, you are afraid. And this is difficult in these conditions to say that you have a valid peaceful proposal, especially that the peaceful movement was not successful. Also in the earlier decades, the peaceful movements were not able to stop the Iraq war, even despite the historical mobilizations. The peaceful movements were not really able to influence any leader in the last decades who wanted to go to war. So we are now, this is also why I believe that the only peace movement that can actually make a change now is the peace movement in Russia. Because this is, after all, this phase of escalation.
We see green parties supporting militarism. We see social democratic parties who.
This is a bit of another issue, that they are profiting from the situation. This is true. This is true that they are actually profiting from the situation because the pandemic crisis left us in trouble. The energy crisis, which has started before the war and which was caused not only by the war, but also by the fact that the market mechanisms were employed on the energy market. All this left the mainstream liberal democratic parties in a very difficult situation. And yes, I agree that this is profitable for them to tell to people that we are on war, so you can't demand, for example, more public services, or you can't demand higher wages because you are on war. This is really a profitable situation for them. And, this is paradoxical to see even like the Social Democratic Party is focusing now on the military questions instead of at least proposing some vision in which the security or the defense questions is covered, but also people are not left without resources for living.
But I mean, yeah, because I mean, it's because we also I can't believe I forgot to talk about Finland as well. Most of the left parties there are all for joining NATO. But I was going to say was that even though NATO had always managed to co-opt much of the left, there at least was a bit of a constituency amongst social democratic parties and some early green leftish parties that we shouldn't be that we shouldn't be joining NATO. We don't want to be completely. We don't want to have an agreement with the Russians the way the Warsaw Pact was, but the whole. Neither Washington or Moscow was sort of the whole. Was sort of the whole raison d'etre of elements of the anti-war movement, but it just seems as if all of that is completely gone, and it's only just a few voices of reasons, a few communist parties or a few Marxist groups that have the opinion that I think you and I have, which is that we shouldn't have NATO. We may not like the current regime in Russia, but we want détente with Russia because we need that if we don't want to die from an accidental nuclear war and if we want to fix the climate crisis.
This is I think that we are also collecting the fruits of the mistakes we made in the past. So we can't, like the peace movements now can't repair that all the previous decades where they were not able to become mass movements. There was a period after the Second World War when there was a chance to strive for all human neutrality and to organize international relations on other bases. We missed that chance, and we are still suffering from the consequences. It is very tough to say now what should be done. How should the peace movements be rebuilt? For me, it would be even inhuman if now somebody claiming to be a peace activist called to Ukrainians to stop the resistance. They are defending. They are defending they are defending their lives. That is the truth. So there must be a really huge effort to reinvent the whole international relations systems, and the key to that is what will be done inside the key imperialist powers. So in Russia, as I said, on one hand, given to Ukraine in the Ukrainian context, but in the US as well, given the context of all wars that the US started or supported here and there.
So it sounds to me as if you're hoping that whatever peace movement does exist in Britain and in Canada, the US and so forth, may it continue to blossom and blossom and blossom then.
Oh, what I said, we are now again in the bipolar world, or a kind of multipolar world, with the third world emerging again. So the key things will happen in the centers. That is what I think. So that is why I emphasize so much the importance of the peace movements in Russia and the United States for a moment. What we can do in Europe is not to let the government forget that we have also other needs than the military. That is all right.
But one can only hope that the peace movements of Europe, they're not dead. They're just in the coma right now. So one can only hope that they can wake up from the coma and so forth.
And come with a vision for everybody, and with a vision where our Eastern European voices are not neglected. Because
exactly.
The last thing we need is to divide the world again and to leave millions of people aside.
And I'm going to have you back on the program to talk more about what's going on in Germany and in the Scandinavian countries. But for now, I don't want to end it, but we do have to end it. We were joined on this edition of 1+1 with contributor to the Barricade, Transform Europe, Transform Network, host of Crossborder Talks, Małgorzata Kulbaczewska-Figat. And just before we end, I just want to wish everybody. Oh, see, my afro is way too big.
So I join you.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
Just want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, Happy Kwanzaa, and so forth. And we hope that our listeners at all of those outlets I mentioned, and at 1+1, we hope that you all have a very good Happy Holidays and best wishes until then. People
Bye,
fighting
guys.
power to people, death to the warmongers.